Welcome back to my channel. Again, this is Georgia Hills RC. This is part 2 of the Sebart Avanti XS. This video we're going to be focusing on getting the turbine installed and start planning out our fuel system. Let's look at what we got on the bench here to deal with. So we've got the turbine. We've got a pipe support. This goes in the back end of the airplane. We have the pipe, and we have the mounting hardware for the pipe. The fuel tank's back here. This is a E-Jet Jet Fan Pro 120 millimeter. This is actually going in my Skymaster Viper. It's also the same fan I have in my EDF Lizard. Wanted to take a minute and actually show you the inside of the Avanti with both the EDF and the turbine sitting inside. Let's go over to the airplane and check that out. Alright, so here we have the inside of the Avanti. Now, the engine rails for this jet are back here. It's a little disappointing. The access to the engine compartment is a little tight. There's no hatch on the top, there's no hatch on the bottom, so we have to kind of work inside here. It's going to kind of make things a little difficult. Now, in the first video I mentioned that this airplane can also be a 120 millimeter EDF. And I showed you at the beginning of this video we have one right here. This would be the one that I would put in here if I would actually make it electric. Now you can see if we put the EDF unit back here, there's supposed to be mounting tabs on here. I haven't glued them on here yet, but you can see that the EDF unit 120 millimeter fits absolutely perfect between these two engine rails. So there'd be absolutely no modifications you'd have to do to actually install this EDF unit. But now, come over here and grab the turbine. Now the turbine, you can see, is actually quite a bit smaller than the EDF version. Let's see if I can do this with one hand here. As we put the turbine back here, the engine rails don't even touch the engine mounts on the turbine. So there's a couple millimeter gap between each one. So what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to put some engine mount extensions on. So I've got some carbon fiber. I'm going to cut some plates. We're going to mount those on here to extend these out a little bit to be able to mount our turbine. The other thing we have to do is we have to mount our thrust pipe support. That goes in the back of the airplane right here. The airplane is actually set up for the EDF, so this hole right here fits the EDF thrust tube very well, but not the turbine pipe. So we're going to have to put this inside here. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. We have to go in through here and manipulate it back to get it set against the back bulkhead. So we're going to start by making the engine rails, and we're going to get our pipe support installed. Alright, so we got the engine rail extensions cut. Got both of them here, one for each side. They ended up being, I made them 30 millimeters wide and 70 millimeters long. They're going to sit and get mounted to the existing engine rails to extend them out. I'm going to sit right about there. I got it right even with the notch in the existing rail. So now what I got to do is match up the holes that are on the existing rail and drill some holes to match in this. So I've got a piece of painter's tape in here I've got it cut flush with the edge of the rail, including the notch, and I got both screws or blind nut holes marked out so I can take this piece of tape, transfer it to the engine rail extension, and do that on each side. I'm going to drill holes. Since the turbine is going to sit a little farther forward than these two, I'm also going to match up a third hole that's going to be drilled right about here. So we're going to put that in the engine rail as well. So we're going to have 3 holes holding the extensions on, and then the 2 holes for the actual turbine mounting. I'm going to get this transferred over and drill these holes, and we can get them put in the airplane. Alright, we got the turbine rail extensions built. We got 3 bolts in right now. They're not permanently secured yet, not until we get the location of the holes for the turbine mount actually drilled in these. But they're in there. It actually pulls the rail out about, I think it's 10 millimeters. And now when we set the turbine in here, it sits right between there. A little bit of a couple millimeters of side to side travel so we can actually get it lined up with the pipe. Next step is we're going to get this pipe in here so we can start lining up the turbine and the pipe together. The pipe, we have to install these little L brackets on the side of the bell mouth, and those are going to mount to the bulkhead back here. I'm going to start working on getting the brackets installed on the pipe. I'll show you how you're going to do those. Get these lined up. We got to drill the holes in the pipe for that. So let me get that set up and we'll look at the pipe. Alright, so we've got to get the pipe mount attached to the pipe. I've got the bell mouth here. I use this flexible tape measure, wrap it around the bell mouth, find out the diameter of the bell. Turned out to be 366 millimeters. Then what I did was take half of that, so 183. I looked for the seam on the pipe so that I have the seam towards the top of the airplane. I placed a mark on the side of the bell about roughly 90 degrees off of that, and I measured 183 millimeters around and made a mark on the other side. What that does is give me a precise line through the middle of the bell. Now the engine sits on those brackets, and these brackets mount to the former right behind that. So what you're going to want to do is make it so the brackets sit right above the mark, so that this is basically the middle of the engine rails. You can kind of put it on this side to kind of see how we want to mount that. Do that on both sides. That offsets both brackets towards the top, which this bottom part of the bracket should line up with the bulkhead in the airplane. So we're going to line these up. I'm also going to line them up so that the corner of the bracket is even with the front of the bell. Alright, so I'm going to get these lined up, get the holes drilled, and get them attached to the bell, and then we can stick it in the airplane and start lining up the pipe and the turbine. Alright, so pipe brackets are installed, pretty simple. Line them up, drill the hole, put the bolt in. I put the screw head on the inside and the locking nut on the outside. One thing I did notice that I'm going to have to address before we get the pipe in here is the let's see, the bracket right here, the bulkhead, not really, actually where is it? Way in the back here. One back there was not glued in very well, kind of broke loose a little bit, so I'm going to mix up some high sol and put some high sol on that bulkhead, between the bulkhead and the engine rail on each side, strengthen that up a little bit. The other thing I did is, remember that little pipe support bracket in the back here? Now I've got it installed, just fits up in the end. It's a little bit of a pain to get it in the back. I believe it's intended to be glued in, but again, if I ever decide I want to convert this thing to electric, I want to be able to take that out. So all I did was put in a bunch of little servo mounting screws to help hold this bracket in place. It's not structural, so I believe they want you to glue it in, but it really doesn't make a difference. I actually saw another guy do this, and I liked that idea, so I kind of copied it. So pipe brackets, or pipe support, is put in. We get that high sol mixed up and put in there, and then we can start lining everything up. Alright, I've got the bulkhead high sol back into place. Ended up having to do both sides. Pipe is currently installed. What I did was I used these little clips to help hold the brackets to the bulkhead while I help line up the pipe. And basically what we're doing on the pipe on this one was centering it between the bulkhead and then making sure that the vertical adjustment on the turbine was good. The turbine's just sitting in there right now. I'm look up the tailpipe right now and see if I can get it centered here. You can see that the turbine is basically perfectly centered right now. I've been playing around with the engine position, so it's pretty much good to do the final adjustments. Now, one thing we got to do is set the depth on the exhaust cone in the middle of the bell mouth. This one's a large bell mouth, so you want to do it somewhere around the middle, 25 millimeters usually. So the way I like to do it is I've got a wooden dowel. What I do is I stick it up the tailpipe and I mark where the bell meets the pipe and where the front of the bell is. This one ended up being 48 millimeters, so 25 millimeters, basically halfway. I marked it right in the middle, so 24 millimeters. And then what we can do is stick the dowel up the tailpipe till it touches the end of the cone there, and then we can use it to set the depth of the engine. So you line up the middle mark. It's kind of hard to see right now, but I marked it on the inner pipe there. So depth looks pretty good. We can start making sure that the engine is lined up in the center of the pipe, and we can mark the holes and drill them and get the turbine mounted. Alright, turbine is all mounted. All the bolts are in and tight. Looking up the back end here. Turbine is nice and centered in the pipe. I think the last thing I'm going to do on video number 2 here is I've got this Futaba Airspeed sensor. It's a pitot tube. I'm going to just mount the probe in the front here and run the wires back here, and I'll figure out where I'm going to mount the sensor a little bit later. I've got the same airspeed indicator on my 90mm Avanti. There it is, sticking out the nose. I'm not going to stick it out quite that far on this one. There's a little bit more room inside the nose of the airplane to get this probe installed. I like having airspeed on the airplane. The airspeed is more important than ground speed. Ground speed just tells you how fast it's moving across the ground. Airspeed is actually telling you what the wings are feeling. So airspeed is more important to me than ground speed. So we're going to get an airspeed probe put on here. First thing we're going to do is sand the tip of the nose just a little bit, kind of create a little bit of a flat spot. Helps keep our drill centered and keeps it from skipping off to the side. The tube itself is a 3mm diameter tube, so I'm going to use a 3mm drill bit, drill this hole, and then we'll work on getting it mounted inside the airplane. Alright, pitot tube is installed. Again, I filed the flat spot on the front. Used a 3mm drill bit to drill a hole in the front. There's a silicone tube that attaches to the back of the pitot tube. It's easier to put the silicone tube on before you install the tube because it's way up there in the front. And then I push the tube in from the back out the front of the airplane. Actually worked out kind of nice. It lines up on that little tray right there, right in the middle. So what I was able to do is, the manual wants you to have 20mm, at least 20mm from the front. I've got it about 30. Lined up the pitot tube, put a little bit of CA on the front. And then on the inside, I used a little bit of E6000 around the end, kind of keep it straight. Tie up the silicone wire a little bit later. The Futaba unit only uses one airline, just the pitot air. The static air is actually on a port on the side of the telemetry module itself. So there's only one tube that needs to be run to the front. We do have our little finishing detail here. Got to put the flag on the front. Also makes the airplane look really cool. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Well, we got the turbine and pipe installed. Everything's lined up. Looks good. Pitot tube is mounted. Next video we're going to work on getting all the equipment put in, all the wires cleaned up. And we'll see how that goes from there. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.